Hello, everyone, and welcome once again to the Open Mic, Writers in Their Own Words, where every show I talk to writers about their work, the publishing industry, and how they do what they do. The show is available by the same name on both YouTube and via all of the major podcast platforms, and you can subscribe to either or to both so you never miss a thing. My guest today, Vince Wetzel, is making his second appearance on the show, which coincides with the pending release of his second novel, Lose Yourself. Lose Yourself is the intertwining story of six people, all struggling with vastly different complications in their lives, all of which come to a head at the final game of the Major League Baseball season. Uh, where one of them seeks to make baseball history. Spoiler alert, it's the player. I've had the honor of being a beta reader on this one. I tell you, it's a great read. I'm really excited to have Vince here today because not only is he a fellow writer, he's a friend. Vince, excuse me, trying to make the voice work there. Uh, let's talk a little bit about what's going on. How are you doing, man? Back to the open mic.
Uh, Rich, thanks for having me again. It was a pleasure to be with you on the first time. I know that if we replayed that interview, I know I would probably kind of shake my head at some of my naivete of the whole process, but I'm glad to come back and talk to you again.
Well, we're going to talk about some of the things that you've learned here because, the smart person, if you're doing this game, you learn something with every venture you take on. That's part of the whole thing, right? So, but let's start with the new book. If you're watching this on YouTube, you see the great cover behind Vince here. If you're listening to this on the podcast, you'll just have to go buy the book, and that's how you'll see it. But first, for those who are, didn't get to be a beta reader like me, tell us all about Lose Yourself.
Yeah, well, you kind of talked about it. It's six characters, six stories, separate intertwining stories, all taking place at the final game of the baseball season. It's kind of centered around the player, as you said, who's trying to hit 400 and make a major league history. But he's got his own hubris and his own demons that he has to deal with. But at the same time, the other five stories are just as enlightening and as impactful to those lives as possible. You're kind of like thinking about, remember that TV show Friday Night Lights?
Hmm.
It wasn't just about football. It was about this town, and it was about the different people and the characters within that town. So it's kind of like that. It's like every good movie and novel. It's more about just the game. It's more about the humanity and the people, and uses baseball or the sport as the backdrop that helps reveal some of that humanity.
Absolutely. Well, and you do a great job with it, and it really is a wide array of characters, and it really isn't a baseball book, and which brings me to you know I guess I'll just spill the tea here on myself. My agent is shopping my work in progress around right now. The feedback has been really positive in terms of the writing and characters and stories. But so far, everyone has passed because they don't think enough people will buy a book that's set in baseball. This is, of course, very disappointing to me, but we're early in the process. But it does beg the question, did you have any hesitation yourself in setting Lose Yourself in a baseball setting?
I did. I mean, it because there's one pretty predominant baseball story, but the other five, they're at the game, but the whole drama of everything that they're going through is not related to baseball at all. It's family dynamics. It's you know uh, somebody who's got gambling debts and needs to make a big score in order to see his daughter. There's somebody who's dealing with just intrinsic kind of sexual harassment issues, and but while also dealing with her mom and financial issues there. There's a stepson who's trying to navigate this new world with his future stepdad, and what does that mean? Does he feel like he's getting lost in this whole process of his mom marrying somebody new? There's all these other things. So when you get back to this baseball piece, it has been it's a challenge to try to market it beyond just baseball. But at the same time, what I learned from the first book is that when you're in the indie space, it's almost better to just embrace the niche and go as far in deep into it and just sell into the niche as much as you can. So on an indie side, you can almost say, you know what, I'm going to go as deep as I can into it and really sell it that way. I mean, that's how, a lot of indie writers, their success comes because they're very genre focused. They're either romance or science fiction or fantasy, or even some crime fiction, detective stories, that type of thing. I'm not in any of those genres. So for me to go niche, I gotta, baseball seems like a good place for me to just try to push my envelope.
Right. Well, I was going to ask this later, but we might as well talk about it now because, I mean, I think you learn a lot of lessons when you go indie. I mean, and there's really good reasons to go independent, but there are also serious challenges. We're talking about the marketing. That's the big one, or what other writers have referred to in talking to me as discoverability. Not so much the marketing as just having people being able to find your work. Um, you just mentioned one lesson, one lesson there that's really valuable of, learning your niche and embracing it. What other lessons do you feel like you've learned between your first time around with Friends in Low Places and now with Lose Yourself?
I think like with your any first endeavor, the first book is your passion project. It's the one thing that you kind of you write and you go, oh, this is going to be the best. It's gonna knock the world by storm, and you almost get too ahead of yourself, and you go, it's gonna find its audience. It's going to. I just know it is. It's just so good. It's just gonna find its audience, and it's gonna move on from there. And you write it with a passion, and you go through the process with the passion. I think with the second book, you understand this is a business, and you almost have to treat it as such. Like you need to understand that this is. I mean, the story is the story. You make as much the best out of the story as possible, and I think I even did a lot better work in the story itself on this book. But at the same time, you're thinking about it as a business. What is the product that I'm putting out there? And I even actually opened up or created my own imprint with its own business license and all of those tax liabilities and all that, because I wanted to think about it in that context. And that's what you have to do. You have to really kind of think of the book as a product of your business, and you are your business, and you have to move it in that direction.
Yeah, I've actually had other indie writers tell me that very same thing. Some have been more successful than others, but I think the happiness factor for them is higher in a lot of ways because I think if you're an entrepreneurial person, if you have an entrepreneurial mindset, and I'm going to backtrack a step here. I'm a reporter and an editor, and I've done a lot of freelance work over the years. I've been staff, and then I've been freelance, and so a lot of people have come to me over the years and asked me about getting into freelancing, and the thing that I've always said to them, speaking about as a freelance journalist, is you really have to think like an entrepreneur. You really, because if you take a job, then you have to do that job, right? You can't take the job and then complain that it doesn't pay you enough money. If you take the job, you have to do it, right? And no matter if it takes you 10 hours or 1,000, the idea is to be good enough at what you do to have it take less than that, right? That's the whole idea and that's the entrepreneurial thinking is you are a product, you are providing a product to another business entity. And for you to make a living at this, you have to be able to provide that product. at the least amount of cost to you to make it a viable economic thing for you to do. It's the same thing really with books, right? If you're going to be an independent author, I mean, you really do have to have that same mindset, that entrepreneurial mindset that, as you said, I think you phrased it very, very well. You are the business. You are the one building the brand. The book is the product you're giving, but it's you that people are really investing in. And so I think that's a really great lesson for anyone listening to this who's thinking about going their own way on that. I think it's a really great lesson to remember here. Um, in terms of actual marketing things, I know you've done book signings and some social media ads and other things. One of those has maybe worked the best for you, or is there something different that has worked the best for you in terms of actually just moving books?
Yeah. So what kind of going back to that niche piece of it, I found the discoverability of it was pretty interesting. Is that so? Friends in Low Places takes place at this remote lake above Fresno, and over the course of 20 years, right? Um, and I found a couple of Facebook groups for people who have cabins and houses and vacation up there. They love it up there. And what I found was when I shared the book to those groups, they ate it up. I mean, they would just because it's a remote group, it's a remote lakes. People don't have, there's a lot of books on Lake Tahoe or the, the Pacific Ocean, but there's not a lot of books about Huntington Lake. But there are these dedicated fans that love Huntington Lake. So that's where I kind of started going, oh, if I lean into this niche, they're going to buy it because it's Huntington Lake. They want a book about the place that they love. And they're going to read it, and they're going to read it, share it with a shared experience with me as I tell them the story. And they're going to probably, if they have a cabin, they're going to put it in their cabin, or they're going to share it with other friends and family who also took their trips with them up to these places. So I had started to lean really heavily into that. So but I also did, kind of a friends and family book tour. I did a brewery and book tour, and I had like 3 or 4 locations, and it was a great time to have a beer with friends. I went to Sacramento, of course, where I live, and then I had Bakersfield, my hometown. So I had all the people that I grew up with come out, and that was fun. And then I went to one in Southern California where I went to college and had a lot of fun there with a lot of friends and such. And then I had one up at that lake I set up a table in front of the pizza place, and I shared it on social media that I was going to be there. And I had about 10, 12 people who came because of that social media. But then I had like another 20 people buy books just as they were getting pizza, because they're like, oh yeah, this is great. It's right here. It takes place here. And then I was like, great. So, you have to find that, again, going back to that niche piece, you have to find the niche that gets people to take a chance, especially if they don't know you. You got to appeal to something other than the book. It has to relate to something that really fuels them to buy your book for another reason.
Well, regular viewers and listeners of this show have heard me rail about this before, and I think this is one of the things you do well, in that, and you just described a lot of ways where you appeal to people beyond just buy the book. In fact, buy the book is the last thing. It's not the first thing. And it drives me crazy with authors, whether they're indies or not, traditional, because regardless, and unless you're a very big name author in this day and age, you're going to have to do a lot of your own marketing, right? So even if you're a low top list, if you're anything below that mid list, and especially, down toward the bottom, you're going to do 98% of your own marketing, right? So it drives me crazy that when you see these people online and all they ever say is buy my book, buy my book, buy my book. And I think it repulses people, and that is unfortunate. Because I think you have an opportunity to connect with people on this emotional level and build a fan, as opposed to a consumer of one product, they become a fan of you as a writer. And
Right.
so I love everything you're talking about because those are great ways to connect with people. And they'll always remember, well, hey, I met Vince Wetzel at the pizza place. Oh,
Right.
hey, I saw Vince's book at it was in the cabin I rented up at the lake, right? Those are, let's look at this new book, right? So I
Right.
think that's
Exactly.
really smart.
And I mean, it kind of goes into that. You probably will ask the question, but it kind of is my strategy on the Substack space is just helping to service that idea. Like I'm going to share short stories. Sharing these little fridge philosophies and my writing journey, so that people can get to know me and go, okay, well, I like what he's writing. I get these little snippets of these little short stories, or I get snippets of what his thought process is, and all of this. Yeah, I like this guy. I'll buy his book.
Yeah, I was going to bring up Substack because, now Substacks now are a little bit like podcasts. I feel like everybody has one. So, but, not everybody has a good one. And you have a really good one. And I like how you do it. The best ones I'm finding now, there are some I read that are a little longer, but the ones that I read the most consistently are fairly short and fairly to the point. They don't take a lot of time to read. They're easily digestible. I mean, I'm reading it over morning coffee, so I don't need the Magna Carta. And so I really appreciate how you do it. And there's a lot of variety. What, um, what's your main philosophy, I guess, with the newsletter? And
Yeah,
why did you choose Substack over maybe some of the other options that are out there?
yeah, good question. So, uh, the one thing I think you had an author said he writes to service the novels, and so that was kind of the main thing. And I've heard people, you need to get a mailing list. You need to get a mailing list, and that was one thing that I did not have with Friends in Low Places. And even after I started selling it 2 years into it, I still had no mailing list. So how am I supposed to continue to build a relationship with readers if I have no way to get in touch with them? The only way they know me is through the novel. There's no way to interact with people who buy a physical book or even an ebook. There's not really any way to. Maybe they see me on social media, but those are just such small snippets. It's either X and it's so many characters, or Facebook posts, and sometimes I'm very selective because there's personal stuff on there too. So I try to not be too crazy on it. Um, but Substack allows me to kind of go a little bit longer form, not long, not Magna Carta long, but allows me to kind of develop some thoughts and ideas on some things that I constantly think about, just in terms of productivity, and on just being a good human, those type of things, and what kind of is behind some of those kind of altruisms, or that altruistic uh, part of life, where those truisms that we all endear to be, and to be good people. So I like to explore that and why that is. And then I have those other things too. But the reason I chose Substack is I kind of did some kind of research on it. One is that there was an easy way to monetize if I so chose to do it. That was one piece, because again, I'm an indie writer, I'm an entrepreneur. So if there's a way to just monetize it, even if it's $5 a month or something like that, it's still something that's appealing. And secondly, the way that there was a web presence, but also an email component. So you can, on Substack, you write your post, you can hit send, it goes out to the mailing list, but then it also lives on Substack. And so there's a discoverability there. And they've developed a little bit more of a social media part of it. So people who don't know you can just kind of discover you on Substack, whether it's through like me commenting on somebody else's great posts that they put out, and there's a lot of, as you said, there's a lot of great writers on there. So maybe they see something I wrote in response to another person's post, and they go, "Who is this Vince Wetzel guy? Let me see what he's about." They can discover me that way. So it allows me to kind of broaden my reach to people in a very natural and authentic and way. But also, it allows me to have a mailing list to share stuff with that mailing list every week, promote, the upcoming novels um, regularly without having to be overly, as you said, just kind of buy my book, buy my book, buy my book. It allows me to be a little bit more, uh, a little bit more nuanced on how that I push that out there.
Well, and I should note too, you know, it always feels positive. There's a positive, not Pollyanna. I don't want to give that
Right.
impression, but and this coming from somebody who loves, noir crime fiction and that kind of a thing. I'm reading a collection of Jordan Harper short stories right now, and I'm telling you, you need to gird yourself, when you read his stuff, because it's just definitely the darker side of humanity, which I like that. But first thing in the morning, because for me, first thing in the morning, I'm getting hit with all of the newsletters that I get related to my job. And for those who don't know, I'm a political reporter and editor, so I'm getting all of the stuff from the Washington Post, New York Times, the LA Times, all the stuff here in California, our own stuff here from the publication that I manage and that kind of a thing. And let's face it, the political world right now is very dark, and there's just a lot of darkness to it. And and frankly, a lot of my colleagues in the media world seem to thrive on the not doom scrolling, but the creating the content for doom scrolling. And
Right.
so I try to avoid that stuff in the morning until at least I've had my coffee, walked my dogs, you know, maybe worked out, do all the things that clear my brain so I'm ready for that stuff. What I
Right.
do take in are some of the other things that are not that, right? So I like reading a newsletter like yours, or some of the ones I have related to baseball or other things, because they're not hitting me over the head with that, right? And again, like I say, yours is not Pollyanna, but it's fairly uplifting. It's short, sweet. Sometimes it's a short story. Sometimes it's just some observations or maybe an interview or something that's, easily digestible. And it's something that goes nicely with my morning coffee while all the dopamine and everything in my brain is working itself out, right? So yeah, folks, if you haven't subscribed, I highly recommend it. Check it out. I think you'll find the same thing. I was going to ask this earlier, but I want to circle back because we've mentioned your first novel, Friends in Low Places, which, even though it was a fictionalized story, of course, it was based in, some of a personal history of your own, both the location and your
Mhm.
friends. And so you had that experience to lean on. What inspired Lose Yourself? Was
Yeah.
there, I mean, I know you worked in baseball at one time as an intern with the Dodgers. Was that it, or was there something else that sparked this story idea for you?
Yeah. So there's a couple things. So I kind of go back to 1999, got married. We had a honeymoon in Maui, and I took two baseball novels with me. I took Shoeless Joe by W.P. Kinsella, which later became the movie Field of Dreams, right? And then Man on Spikes by Elliot Asimov, who wrote Eight Men Out, but this was a novel. Man on Spikes was a novel. And I read those and I loved it. Loved both of those stories. I gobbled them up on my honeymoon. And then later that year, the movie For Love of the Game came out, and that's based on a book by Michael Sharma. And when we were driving home, I was like, I could write a baseball novel. I could do this. I could write a novel like that. Well, I wrote like 100 pages of one. Didn't I lost? I lost interest. I lost momentum. A few years later, when I had kids, I started another one. Got about 50 pages into that. Um, and so after Friends in Low Places, which was, as I said, it's a very personal, very relatable story to my own life. A lot of very similar things going on. I went, you know what? Let's try this baseball novel thing again. But I'm always trying to figure out what's a way for me to write this that's going to not keep me at the 100-page mark. What's going to get me over the hump and get this thing finished? And it's something that conversation with you that you had with me one time and talking about. Have you ever thought about writing short stories? And I went, nah, I want to, write novels and such. But as I thought about it, I was like, well, what if, I could write maybe 6 short stories and then smush them together. But it's all in the same genre, the same opportunity, almost like, Pulp Fiction-ish, like some of those multiple storylines all going on at the same time. Can I pull that off? So that's what I did. I started off with like an idea of like, okay, I want to do 6 stories. And I had like the player story kind of mapped out or thought about. I had the lemonade vendor. He was a character from like that one that I wrote that was starting on like 15 years ago. And he just kind of stayed in my brain for 15 years and came out. But then I also did a full box score of the game. And I laid out what the game was like. And then I did Brett's story, which is the player. And then I did Dana's story. And I wrote them each individually. So I did Brett first, then Dana, then Derek, the lemonade guy. I did Will, the kid. I did Fred, the usher, and then I did Lizzie, who is now is a mom and a daughter of a man who's in hospice. But the first draft, she was this teenager, this college student who got pregnant, but it got really dark really quick, and I didn't want to do that, so I had to rewrite that. But in any case, I wrote all 6 stories separately. Then I decided to smush them together. And that was a fascinating process too, just trying to see the nuances. And then you find the strings that are pulling, that each of them are pulling together, and you can find ways for them to interact. And that was a lot of fun. And then, as you know, since you beta read it, you find there's a 7th story in there that plays out in the background of all other 6 stories. So there is actually 7 stories,
Mm-hmm.
but the 7th story is just kind of played in the background until it comes up into the foreground.
Yeah, yeah, and it's a really challenging task to weave that many storylines together because the way so many novels work, you have your primary story and a secondary story, and maybe you have a third very minor thread of some kind. And it's usually there to give just enough weight to characters that are important to the story, but that you don't want to be too big to where they would need to have their own subplot going on, right? They need to be there for a certain reason. And so when you have something like what you have, where you've got a half dozen or more character lines going, and they're all integral, that's a little bit of the magic wand thing, and you do a great job with it. Like I say, I really mean that very sincerely. You do a great job of weaving all those things together. So kudos for that. And because it's a major challenge. Um, I don't want to keep you too long, but I do want to ask you about your book trailer. I I'm of a I'm kind of on the fence about book trailers, right? I've seen some very good ones, and I've seen others, that are not so good, but um, I've never been convinced they sell books. All that being said, I really liked your book trailer. It's great. And of course, I know there's a little bit of a story behind that. So if you don't mind, share that one with us.
Sure. Well, I mean, um, I I have my the person who did it, the contractor that I worked with, comes very well regarded from my own mind, and she was pretty reasonable because she's my daughter, and she's in senior high school, about to go to college and study media studies and doing editing and stuff like that. So I gave her this project and said, "Hey, I want to try this." And that's another thing about being, indie writer. There's so much experimentation you have to do, and you almost feel like you have carte blanche. You want to experiment, and so I went, well, I'm going to experiment with the book trailer. Why not? So she is she's awesome. She knows how. I mean, some of her short films that she's done for in high school are amazing, and I'm not just saying it because I'm her dad, but so I gave her what I wanted, and I said, "Have at it, see what you can figure out." And this is what I'm kind of looking at. And she kind of pulled it together for me, and really did some really great work. And I'm excited to have it out there. Just to, again, it catches people's eye, and when you're an indie writer, you need anything and everything to kind of draw that attention to the work that you got, and it's authentic, right? It's not something that's not appropriate to the book. It's about the book.
Yeah, well, it looks good. It looks, I mean, very, very professional. I mean, you say, oh, my high school daughter did this, but it looks fabulous. I mean, she's very talented. So, and again, as an entrepreneur, you can't afford to go out and pay $5,000 to a high-end production company to do your thing. So yeah, you got to get a little creative because
Right.
it's
You got to
just
say, prom's coming up. I know you need a dress.
Yes, yes. Dad leverage. I like that. Dad
Right.
leverage. Well, I like to wrap things on a fun question. It's always meant to be a fun question anyway. So I'm gonna be my omnipotent self here and say I can put you together with one of the following three people or whatever. Maybe go to a baseball game.
There you
Who
go.
would you choose and why? And I always try to have a thread with these now, and you might figure it out pretty quickly, but if not, I'll reveal that at the end. But the three I'm going to offer you are Lefty O'Doul, Harry Heilman, or Rogers Hornsby.
Ooh.
Three of the greatest baseball players of all time for sure, but that's not quite the thread. But I can put you together with one of the three for
Ooh.
hanging out, maybe watching a ball game. Who would you choose and why?
I think I've been to Lefty O'Doul's in San Francisco. It would be fun to go to Lefty O'Doul's with Lefty O'Doul.
There you go.
Have a beer with Lefty O'Doul at Lefty O'Doul's. Maybe have an O'Doul's with Lefty O'Doul at Lefty O'Doul's.
Enough said. Great, great, great reasoning. Well, for those, and I know not everybody is a baseball nerd like Vince and I, so I will just explain the thread there. Yes, they are all three Hall of Fame baseball players. They are the three players in Major League history who have the highest batting average in a single season under 400.
Mm,
And 400 is a major theme in Lose Yourself. I will leave it at that. Baseball fans will have already figured it out. Those who are not, you will figure it out. It's a big part of the theme of the book. But Lefty O'Doul hit 398, as did Harry Heilman, and Rogers Hornsby hit 397. And I will say in the 20th century. So I left out players from the 1800s, but in the
yeah.
20th century. And nobody has come close to that really since in a full season since
2020.
1941. So anyway,
Yeah.
that
Well,
was
yeah.
they of players in a full season in the
Yeah.
20th century and beyond, they have the highest single season batting averages, those three men. So that was your connection. So Vince, as always, thanks for coming on. I really appreciate it. You shared a lot of great information with people. I always tell folks, look, you can go out and spend a lot of money on craft books and every other thing, or you can just, watch or listen to this show and learn an awful lot from people who know what they're doing.
One thing that I will say real quick, if I can, is
Sure.
just that you do need the good editing. You do need the good cover design. You do need a lot of work. There are those that will just slap it on, but again, going back to selling yourself and being an entrepreneur, that is your reputation on the line. So you need to make it good if you want to have any type of chance of really being proud of the work you're doing.
Absolutely. It really is everything that you put into it. You cannot expect to get big things out of something if you don't put everything into it. That's just a fact. And that's the thing a lot of people maybe don't think about. If you're going to go indie, it costs you money.
Right.
It's expensive actually to have a good editor, not your spouse or your mom, but a good editor and a good cover designer, right? Good people who really know what they're doing and mostly do it for a living. That's how you get good stuff. Unless you have a super talented daughter who can make your book together. So
Right.
contact Vince Wetzel at
Right. Yeah, I think that's a one-off, people.
well, everybody, thanks again. I want to say thanks to Vince. If you haven't done so, give Vince actually give us the release date.
Yeah, it's April 2nd, 2024.
Probably very close to when this will come out. So if it's after April 2nd, go buy a copy. If not, pre-order it. But go to your local indie bookstore. That'd be appropriate. But otherwise, look for it. Vince Wetzel, Lose Yourself. 5 stars from me. I highly recommend it.
Thank you.
I will also say, if you haven't done so already, please hit subscribe. It really does help people, whether you're on listening to the podcast or on the YouTube show. Leave me a nice review. That also really does help people find the show. And, I like to grow the audience as much as anybody. And so please do that. I will also leave you with the thing I always leave you with. I mean it every time I say it. It feels like every time I have to say it these days, it's for a good cause again. But, tomorrow's not promised to any of us. Really, if you have a passion in particular, or whatever, just make today count. Because tomorrow may not be there for you. So make today count, okay? Vince, thank you very much for myself, for my guest today, Vince Wetzel, for myself, Rich Eisen. This has been The Open Mic.